Welcome to Life Unfiltered. I'm excited to announce that today's podcast is sponsored by Rachel Leibowitz, EOS Implementer. EOS stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. What Rachel does when she works with business owners and their leadership teams is help them achieve alignment in the organization around a common vision, instill tools of discipline and accountability, and create a healthy, open, honest culture where people love to come to work, show up, and give it their best. To find out more about Rachel and the work she does, please visit the show notes. On a personal note, off script, I know Rachel both personally and professionally. She is a rock star at what she does. I've seen and heard firsthand from businesses that have worked with Rachel, amazing turnarounds and just the best feedback whenever I've referred her. I can't recommend her enough, and I'm excited to partner with her on this episode. My guest today is marriage and family therapist Seth Menachem. He's the founder of Menachem Psychotherapy Center. He is a psychodynamically-oriented therapist, which means he works with you to help you understand your history so you can discover how it's influencing the ways in which you currently operate in the world. Before becoming a therapist, Seth earned his BA in psychology from Emory University in Atlanta, where he contributed to research and conducted studies in England measuring children's abilities to identify emotions and facial expressions. After moving to LA, where he spent 20 years working as an actor and writer, Seth received his master's in clinical psychology from Antioch University in LA and did his training at Beit T'Shuvah, an inpatient addiction facility. Seth has worked with a variety of clients spanning from a life of privilege to others who are transitioning out of the criminal justice system. Seth also has worked at Creative Care, an inpatient substance abuse rehabilitation facility, specializing in co-occurring disorders such as schizophrenia, bipolar, and borderline personality. Seth works with individuals, couples, and groups in private practice at Menachem Psychotherapy Group. To find out more information about Seth and the work that he does, you can find a link to his website and his Instagram in the show notes. Enjoy. You're the first guest that I get to say welcome back to the show.
That is awesome.
I want to say you're my resident therapist.
That's great.
This
You can
is
say that.
your second time on. I'm so glad that you could do this. The people loved you. So I'm bringing you back for round two.
Thank you so much.
With
Glad to be here.
With the hard-hitting questions.
Yeah, this is your new casual environment. We have no shoes on.
Yeah, it's Life Unfiltered. I wanted it to be
Yeah.
like easy, casual. Thank you for not wearing
It's
your shoes.
obsessively symmetrical for someone who's so casual.
Well, that's why I have the squares on the rug, because it helps me keep alignment.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of casual, but is it really? It's faux casual. You said remove the shoes, make sure the bottle is facing the camera.
Thank
I mean,
you.
it's okay. But I can
Attention.
go with this sort of faux casual vibe. Yeah.
Seth, give us a little color to your early life. Tell us about your childhood. Like, what was it like growing up?
I grew up the third of four kids.
Okay.
Grew up in Miami, New York until I was 6, and then Miami, in a big, fairly chaotic Jewish family. What would you like to know about my childhood that would be worth discussing here? How I became a therapist, why I became a therapist, when it was
Well,
like
we're
for
going to
me.
get there. So I guess, all right, rambunctious family.
So, yeah, third of four, probably a bit lost in a very chaotic sort of world. Brothers took up a lot of space, and I tend to shut down, I guess, when things are so big. So I listened a lot, paid a lot of attention, was very sad as a kid as well. Had a therapist who was very good for me when I was about 13, who I started working with, which made me love therapy, which is how I ended up with an undergrad in psychology.
Oh, wow. I
Before I was
actually
an
didn't
actor.
even know any of that, and I've known you for like a long time.
We can dig deep if you want. I can tell you about it.
I actually, something you
know?
just said, that you were sad as a kid.
Yeah.
I only realized recently as an adult that I think I was sad a lot as a kid too. But I don't know when did you know, you actively knew as a kid that you were sad?
Yeah, I actively knew I was sad. I what I don't talk about, I guess, is that I tried to kill myself when I was about 13 or 14. I just wanted to start this off light, so we can start there with an overdose of extra strength Tylenol. And I'm sure more a cry for help than it was me wanting to die. I told a friend who had, I think, continued to call the house until my parents got home, and I was put into a hospital, a psych hospital, for about 2 months. which is where I met this therapist. So I definitely understood. I was sad. I understood that I was not happy in the world. I didn't know how to express what was going on with me.
Was it situational, or were you sad for as long as you can remember?
Both. It was definitely situational, but I also have a leaning towards depression.
Okay.
As silly as I am, I definitely have a leaning towards depression, which
Well, they say like comics are always the most depressed.
are sad people. So I finally addressed that in my 30s. Was the first time I went on medication for depression, and I had been against this my whole life, including as a kid in a mental hospital. Right, I'm in a psychiatric hospital, refusing to take anything. Always felt it would shift some part of me that I did like there was something inherent in me that I liked, but I was so nervous that it would change that. And I realize now that I just have a leaning towards depression that a lot of people have. I'm not alone in that, especially us Ashkenaz Jews.
Well, I don't know why I think that's funny, but because it's the truth.
Depression and yes, Pepto-Bismol, both of those always travel with me when I go anywhere. It's my antidepressants and that. But I realized that for whatever reason, holding back that little serotonin is really helpful for me. The why of it, I don't even think psychiatrists can answer. But
yeah.
So that's the part of it that's not situational. That's biological. And the situational stuff, I was limited with my understanding of the world, as we all are when we're kids.
Yep.
And so I wasn't really able to make sense of that until I was older. But I think being in the hospital gave me an escape from the home, which is probably what I needed.
Wow. God, Seth, off with a bang. Do you think Ashkenazi Jews are chronically depressed because it's situational? Like, why are Ashkenazi Jews so depressive?
Well, I mean, you can view things through a few different lenses. So one would be this theory of epigenetics, that we pass on trauma, and that trauma is sort of genetically built into us because of, obviously with Jews, a history of trauma that,
they don't like
has
us.
been going, they don't tend to love us for whatever reason. So
We're
we've been
such a lovable
kicked out. And
people.
we're good people. I mean, really. In terms of proofs of people, we're not the worst.
Yeah, so it's like, it's a collective trauma, isn't it?
So there's definitely collective trauma in there. I joke about Ashkenaz Jews, Sephardic Jews have similar trauma and not the same stomach issues we do. They can eat spicier food.
Yeah.
Well, that's learned. That's passed on. Our food tends to be more bland.
And better skin. Maybe that's why they're less depressed.
Yeah. My father was half Greek, so I have some mix in me.
Yeah, you
Thankfully.
do. The people who are watching us visually will see that.
Yes, the olive tone.
Yeah.
Is it showing up on camera?
Sure is.
Good.
Sparkling.
Yeah.
You had a major, mid-life career change, huge. You went from being, tell us about, you were an actor and a writer for a very long time.
So I first got a psychology degree. Graduated from Emory University in 96, and then moved out to LA and was acting and writing. I loved acting. I was always doing it. Did not have anyone in the business or any sense of how to do it. So I moved out here and decided life is short. My father had died as a teenager. I thought, you have such a short window in life, no matter how long you live, whether it was 50 like he lived or 100. And so I went and was acting and writing out here for almost 20 years, a good amount of time.
I loved your early work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I have some fans of my early work. But it was, I was lucky that it actually was able to sustain me as much as I joke. I made a living off of commercials and some TV shows, but there were so many ups and downs. There was so little I had in control of my own career, which is frustrating. And I think if you're bright and curious and you're working hard and it's not paying off because of that, it's really frustrating, or it pays off, but not in ways that were logical. And the work I was doing, I didn't always love. I wasn't always able to choose the kind of work I did. I loved when I worked on things that I had written, shows that I'd sold with a friend, and we were able to shoot stuff together. That was really enjoyable. And I'll always love the creative, but there was also a part of me that wished I had a private practice. I thought about having a private practice longer than I did being an actor. And so I nervously decided to go back to school and get my master's in clinical psychology.
Right. And how old were you when you did that?
I was 40, I think, or almost 40.
That's amazing. That's a really hard that's like a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I'm going to be 49 next week, so it's been
God, you look great.
Thank you, Adel.
I just think about that and like just really how impressive it is because, you know, in society today, like the older you get, the more farther along. In some regards, you have this confidence, this knowledge, this experience, and this understanding, but it also becomes more and more scary to take leaps and like and make huge changes. So like, I'm impressed by that. I guess I want to say.
Thank you. I think it's you can easily prevent yourself from doing something when you think about how giant it is. Meaning, I wanted to be a therapist, and I thought, well, I had my 4 years of undergrad. I still need another, 2 years of a master's and 3 years of training, and the 5 years sounds tremendous, and the amount of work to get there was also tremendous, in school, et cetera, and juggling 2 kids in diapers. And if I thought about it that way, it would have prevented me from doing it. I am good at forcing myself to just put one foot in front of the other and start with today. And so that's how I did it.
Man, that's right. You had the 2 little kids. That's wild. I think that's like a big, like, when you've got the family, that's also another whole thing to contend with.
That's right. They're now 11 and 13.
Because you're also like, you're not really making money when you're first starting out because you're in school. Like, you can't be practicing, right?
That's right. You're in school. I was still doing a little bit of acting, but the problem was I would book a job or a callback and have to miss a class. Right. 1, I didn't want to miss classes, and 2, I think if you miss 2 classes or more, you have to take the class over, and I wanted to get it done as quickly as possible. Yeah. The other thing that happened was I didn't realize how much I would love grad school. Love graduate school.
I hear that a lot.
It feels intimidating at first.
What's amazing about it?
So long. I guess I realized I love to learn. You're also older. You're coming at it from such a different perspective. So all of a sudden, I'm the nerdy one who was papers done first, even though I'm so busy at home. I loved being in school. I enjoyed the process of it. You appreciate stuff in such a different way than you did when, if you went to school when you were 18, like I did when I went to undergrad.
Yeah.
So,
and they treat you differently, don't they? Like you're an adult. You're not like a young student.
No, I'm an adult.
You're having better conversations. Let's dive right in. What's going on with the mental health crisis? Why now? Why is it worse than ever? What are we seeing?
Well, I guess first we have to assume that it's worse than ever. Is that the case?
I think it is. I mean, well, I guess here in California, I would say that we're exposed physically, visually, to see more of the mental health crisis maybe than some other places. We're confronted with it in different ways, I think, here in California. But if you're looking at just...
I was being genuine. I really don't know.
But what about the mass shootings?
Without a doubt, mass shootings are worse.
They're okay, well, would we not tie that to mental health?
Well, all right. So I think we've always had mental health issues in our society, and they definitely haven't always been addressed.
Right.
People have been, hesitant to go to therapy. I mean, it wasn't until Freud that we even had therapy, that it was thought of that way. You went to your physician who would prescribe you whatever drug at the time. So
morphine.
It's fairly new. A lot of morphine. Yes.
Bring back the morphine. Am I right?
Yeah. Bring back morphine. So one, you could make an argument that the mental health crisis, do I have to line this up for you? Is that good? Speaking of mental health crisis, that people are more aware of therapy and they're more open to going. That's a good thing. That's a positive. True. The mass shootings, we can look at through a mental health lens, and without a doubt, there are people slipping through the cracks, and that is hugely problematic. I would make the argument that people have slipped through the cracks at many points in history. They haven't always had access to assault rifles. Right.
So do you think that perhaps the mental health crisis is the same bad that it's always been, just we have media, we have social media, we have regular media, and like exposure to it? Like, you don't think it's worse now?
I think we've had points of time in history when there's been war and horrible deaths and much less, think of the comforts of our world in comparison to our parents, our grandparents' generation.
Yeah. But seemingly the comforts of our world are not creating less mental health.
No, I don't mean to discount what's going on. I'm not trying to challenge just to challenge.
I mean, maybe because
I'm being genuine in that I don't know whether the mental health crisis is actually worse or not. I do think there's a mental health crisis, and I do think that there's been periods of history where there has been as well, and just totally unaddressed.
Yeah.
The good news is that there's more exposure and it could be addressed now. The problem is whenever there's something new in the world, like technology, like social media, which you're probably referring to, we don't yet know how to address the problem. Is the problem inherent in social media?
Right.
Is it an issue with the way people are interacting or not interacting as often? And you know, we definitely have evidence that there's, for example, studies where they've seen that, you know, my generation would have the ability to jump on a bike and ride for a mile or two to go see friends.
Yeah.
And this generation tends to stay within the home.
Well, because
So
parents are deathly afraid to let their
That's right.
kids go a mile or 2 miles.
even when though the evidence shows that the
It's
danger
not
is the
unsafe.
same.
Right, exactly.
It's just as unsafe or safe, sometimes even better.
Right.
And in one of those studies, there was proof of that, where interestingly, a guy went and took a look at a neighborhood, and he would mark out, I think it was in the 70s, how far each kid would go, and he would draw it on a map, and it was complicated. And when he did it again, 10 years ago at this point, he found that everyone had stayed within the home, that there was no interesting map. He asked one of the parents about it. The parents said that it's just scarier now. And he said, you were one of the kids in the study, and it's safer now than it was then.
Whoa.
But you feel like it's scary.
Do you feel like it's scarier for your kids? Like let's take a study of one. Do you
Okay.
feel like it's less safe
That's
for
not
you?
evidence.
That's true.
But let's talk about how you feel.
No, but I do like a study of one.
I have access to more information, as we all do.
Right.
And that information is not always good. So we see how scary the world can be, how terrible the world can be. Also, as you said, living in Los Angeles, you have more exposure to mental health crises outside,
Right.
drug addiction and homelessness. So you're sort of seeing things, and,
Right.
and that's definitely scary. I don't keep my kids sequestered because of it. I want them to know how to navigate this world. I want them to go play outside. I want them to safely do it, but I also want them to have the skills to be able to do it.
Yeah.
I would argue that I, even in my own practice, see kids who struggle not because the world is so unsafe, but because the parent who so wished to protect them and was doing it out of love and wanting to be protective ended up keeping them so cloistered, so sequestered, that they don't know how to navigate the world. It all feels so scary. They don't know how to make decisions. They don't know how to handle conflict. They get bailed out of trouble when they've gotten into issues at school and so on. That inherently causes depression because you don't know how to navigate a world that seems so big and scary and vast.
I'm seeing that for sure, because it's never more highlighted how your parenting techniques differ from other parents when you have a kid in school and there's an event or a party or something that happens and you make a decision about what you're willing to let your kid do or do not do.
You mean because you're the cool mom?
Well, I am the cool mom, but I would like to say, I mean, I'm not even, this is like, it's really just fact. My kids are seemingly more well-rounded than a lot of their peers. And I can see it's because a lot of the parents are so strict and there's so many guardrails. The kids don't get to explore a lot. They don't get to find out what they're...
I mean, I know you, so I know you had your first child when you were 19 or 20?
Yeah, 20.
19?
Yeah.
20. And so parents who have kids younger do tend to be more lenient.
Is that like...
Yeah, I remember reading it.
But you're kind of lenient. You aren't such a young...
I am, but I'm also
You're
not
an anomaly.
typical.
You're an atypical parent
I am
also.
an anomaly.
Yeah.
I raised my kid. I remember once thinking I wanted to write a book called How to Raise Your First Like a Second.
That's actually so good. Oh my God.
Because
Nobody steal that.
it was... I never wrote it. AI could probably write it for me. But that I thought it was so important that parents... I thought what worked in kids who were not first in the family. I'm third of four. There are problems inherent in that as well, but there are things that went really well because of it. And so that helicopter parenting that didn't happen with me, where it can cause some issues, also caused me to, have the ability to be able to navigate the world very differently.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. This
was a question I was going to ask later in the episode, but I think I'm just going to ask it now. this whole
Break your
the
rules,
new
Adel.
breaking rules.
You're the cool parent. You're the cool host. Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm feeling so validated. Gentle parenting. This new, it is new, relatively new concept, right? This gentle parenting. It certainly wasn't when we were young. What are you seeing? What are you seeing in your practice? Any fallout of that? Are we creating less resilient humans because of it?
What is gentle parenting?
So the gentle parenting now is like giving kids a lot more like autonomy. Like instead of punishments, it's a lot more like, well, if they feel like, pulling things off a shelf because that's like the way that they express. It's a lot more of this like very long leash. I would say, you're not raising your voice. Certainly no. I mean, I'm not pro like any physical, slapping or anything like that. But like, it's very much at like, I don't want to say hands off, but it's certainly a modern, very long leash, my child is going to express what they need kind of approach, rather than the parent strong arming.
I don't want to speak out of turn. I can't.
I'm shocked
I don't
that
know
you
anything
don't
about it except what you're telling me.
I'm
So-
shook that you have not even.
just don't
I guess it's very also a pop culture thing, maybe.
Sure, I don't work with children. I work with adults mainly.
Right.
And we talk about parenting, but obviously with people who are struggling, and it comes up in therapy a lot in terms of how to manage kids. And so I have my own philosophies on how to manage kids, but also I don't believe there's one way to do it. And I also don't believe every kid is the same.
Right.
We make such a huge mistake in treating every kid the same way.
Yeah.
My first kid was nothing like my second.
Right.
If I just had my daughter, I would tell you I could parent perfectly, and this is how to do it. And then I had a second kid, and I have no idea what I'm doing. None. Well, I guess timeouts don't work. I guess you're supposed to just hold them all day. So you really have to adjust towards who the kid is.
Yeah.
My second kid, Asher, my son, who could not sit in a timeout and struggled with emotional dysregulation. Maybe it's gentle parenting in that I felt there was no point in sort of screaming at him for being emotionally disruptive, that he was limited with tools. Some was age appropriateness. Some was him just taking longer to be able to learn how to regulate. And so, for example, he was in a grocery store, had a tantrum, and a woman came over and like picked up my son and said, "Your kid's tantruming." And I said, "What are you doing?"
A random woman.
A random woman.
Oh my God.
When you're a dad who's parenting without the mom, for some reason, society tends to get very involved in the way
The
you
mother
parent.
hens.
Yeah. So there was a point though where I did not know how to manage his dysregulation because the tools that I had weren't working.
Okay.
And I'm like, I'm stuck. I'm not sure what to do. So I asked him, like, what do I do? Asher, I don't know what to do when you're feeling this way. I ask him when he's regulated, not when he's completely dysregulated and screaming. And his idea at the time was push-ups. I was like, great, we'll do push-ups. I did not know what else to do. It was his idea.
Could you do push-ups at the time?
And he had to do them, not me. How dare you? Yes, I can. Now I'm going to have to prove it right here to show you that I can do push-ups. How many? So
That's so clever
he was
of him.
he was dysregulated, and I had forgotten about this rule. And he's like, "Dad, remember push-ups." I was like, "That's a great idea. That's right. I forgot." So I collaborated with him. We worked together to figure it out.
That sounds gentle.
Okay, so then I believe in some aspect of gentle parenting. Now, totally hands-off is problematic.
Yeah.
I think kids should have an understanding of the sense of their world, which is why I was hesitant to sort of jump in and respond to. I don't fully understand the philosophy to be able to speak to it, but I do know that we all need to understand the rules of our world, and kids are looking for the same thing, no matter what stage they're in, whether they're 2 and 3 and starting to push the boundaries in that sense, or they are, like my daughter, 13 and starting to push the boundaries in a different way. But still, need to understand the rules of the world, and then let them rebel against the value system, figure out what theirs is, and so on. But in a very open environment, which is how my house is.
Were you a rebellious kid?
I was an angry, sad kid I seemed more rebellious. And I guess you could make the argument that on the face of it, I look like this sort of rebellious kid.
Do you think that maybe a lot of quote, rebellious kids are maybe sad or angry?
I think for me, I could say the rules of my world were messy.
Yeah.
And I was trying to make sense of it. And it was too chaotic at the time to be able to properly make sense of. And so that probably spoke to a bit of my rebellion. I didn't think I was smart. I didn't think I was cool. It wasn't until I had a teacher in 10th grade, an English teacher. I was in like a basic English class, getting in trouble, skipping school all the time. And she called my mom and said, I think he's a genius. I'd like to have him tested for gifted. My mom said, no, he's weird. She's like, they're all weird. Let me just test him.
Way to go, Mrs. Menachem.
And so, yes, thanks. She laughs about it now. But I didn't know. And I got tested, and it turned out I had a high IQ. And I was put into this philosophy class, which was all they had as the gifted program. It was just one class at the time. And I'm also ADHD, so I could see what's going on out the window. And I went in, and I saw kids that I'd never seen before in school, and I felt smart is all that really mattered. Was that someone told me I was smart, and so I felt smart, and then I behaved as if I were smart. And the truth is, most of us are intelligent enough where you could really shift the way people behave in the world by having them feel good about who they are.
I love that.
Did I ever tell you a study about rats that were done? No. There was an interesting study. Was I wish I remembered who did it, because I'd like to give them credit. But the study was this. A group of scientists take some average lab rats, they give them to their research assistants, and they tell them that they have a certain amount of time to complete a maze.
Okay.
They take these other rats that they bred to be brighter, and they give them to another group of research assistants, and to see if these sort of brighter bred rats will complete the maze faster. And it turns out they completed it much faster. They were done in a few days versus a few weeks. And ultimately what happened was they were all the same average lab rats. There was no difference.
What?
Now, why do the average lab rats were told that they are smarter, perform better? You can't even speak to rats. The rats themselves don't even know they're brighter.
Oh my God.
But the researchers believe they were smarter, which means the researchers even spent probably a different amount of time with them, held them differently. Just knowing that they were brighter, thinking that they were brighter, totally changed the outcome.
This is blowing my mind, because when you think about this just in the context of like humans and how we even like, and just like when you think about where people grow up, how they grow up, minorities, how much could be different if we didn't observe it as, you know, certain. I mean, it's just, it's wild. That study's really crazy.
Why are there sort of positive biases towards white people in this country?
Why?
Not just that. Why do Black people, for example, have the same positive biases? Like, that seems crazy. They grow up in homes of Black family members who love them, who support them, and yet still they have a bias. It's because societally that's what we're taught. And we know that. Like, we have proof of that. There is nothing hardwired in any of us to be that way. The thing that's hardwired in us is to be cautious of people that look different.
Right.
We have an in-group, and we are hardwired to feel more comfortable with that in-group.
Right.
We joke about being Jews, and we feel more comfortable. We're Jews.
Right, of course.
That's hardwired in us.
Right.
And it comes from feeling most comfortable with your family and most safe. And so when we see people who are different than us, we then don't trust them as much. We tend to view them in a negative light. It's the bias that we have to work against.
Right.
The truth is, the way to combat that is just broaden people's horizons.
Yeah.
If you live in an in-group and that's all you see, well, then everyone seems scarier and more negative.
Yeah. Well, I talked about this with Erin Falconer, because she, you know, when we were talking about the friendship concept, she said one of the greatest things that people could do is diversify your friend group and not get like your token friend of any kind, but that you become a better friend when you have a more diverse friend group, because you're exposed to different thoughts, different ideas, different cultures.
You know, it's why, and this isn't to knock conservatives, and we can knock liberals. I know you want to in a bit, which is fine.
Well,
but
how dare you?
But it's okay.
I cannot be labeled.
Hold on. But it's why conservatives were always hesitant to send kids to college, why there's even a push now against liberal media and liberal education. It's because the liberal arts, by taking kids and putting them in an environment that's very diverse, they tend to end up more liberal.
Right.
Because they're just exposed to more people. We see it all the time.
Right. And you drop some of your biases. You start to realize that a lot of these people with different views are just like you. They're just students. They're trying to navigate the world. They're trying to figure out their place. They're trying to make friends. They're trying to.
You've totally broadened your horizon. You get to. I know that you had said that you wanted to speak out woke culture.
Well,
Which
yeah. Only because I have a friend who's at Columbia right now, and he was basically telling me that what he's seeing in the classroom is that people have become completely scared to speak up about anything. I saw a quote just about like, I wish I remembered exactly, but essentially like we are losing the art of being able to kind of question things now, or everyone's afraid.
Absolutely. So
that is.
there you go. Not the liberals.
No, I'm not.
No, I'm saying it is a fair criticism.
Yeah.
Me in the more liberal camp thinks it's hugely problematic.
Yeah. People are scared to speak up.
That's right. That is a problem.
And that's
But it goes
coming
against
from
what we're
woke
saying,
culture.
which is that you need to broaden your idea of the world and ideas.
Yeah.
So if you shut that down, then you can't. It makes it impossible.
That's true.
We now sequester ourselves more. We now sit more in our in-groups, and everyone feels scary and different, and we get angrier, and we entrench ourselves more in our camps, and so on.
Do you think that's what's happening with woke culture, is that essentially woke people or woke culture individuals are mostly hanging out with other like culturally similar, so there's not a think tank, it's the same rhetoric?
Well, all right. So, I mean, one problem I think is just defining the term woke, right?
That's true.
Semantically, it's bandied about, and what does it all mean?
That's
But
true.
The idea is what? To expose yourself to systemic racism, to understand how people in the world
Yeah,
live.
that's a good point. Like, what is woke culture?
Well, to be woke, to be awake, is I
Right.
want to understand the world the best I can. I want to understand people's experiences that are different than mine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
how it should be.
That's true.
And so now you're saying, is there a problem in woke culture? I don't know whether it's woke culture or not. There's a problem in certain liberal academia that stifles people from being able to have conversations that are antithetical to the way they might believe.
Okay.
And it doesn't allow for certain voices to be heard. It doesn't allow nuanced conversations.
Yeah.
And things are nuanced.
That's right.
Now, do I think that conservatives make that same mistake? Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
100%.
let's talk about gun control.
Oh, 100%.
And we don't need to get into it, but if essentially 97%
I
of the
wanna get
people
into
we
it,
find-
actually.
people who believe in carrying guns and people who don't like guns at all, 97% of all these people together believe 90 and 97. There's a debate on the percentage, but that stat is pretty high, which means they all believe that there should be some gun control, like
Yeah.
license it, make sure that there's
Yeah.
a national system in the way we register people who are car owners and so on. And yet everyone is so divided in one of the conversation because it
there's
immediately.
and I have to say, so it's so interesting that you see me as a conservative, because I'm
No, I didn't. I was kidding.
yeah,
I was saying
because
I
I'm
was-
like actually like I'm very outspoken about gun control. Like, I really believe that we have a problem with guns in this country. Like, that's I have a loud stance on that. I just don't even understand why we have such a need for guns. But every time I push back on it on social media, I actually get this very consistent response, which is, right before the Holocaust. It's not funny, but it's just it tells you a little bit about my audience. Right before the Holocaust, they wanted to take away all the guns. What? Like, well, we're not trying to take away guns. Firstly, no, there's too many guns. If we even took away half the guns, there would still be a lot of guns on the street.
I used to live across the street from this very conservative judge. I loved him. I mean, he taught my kids how to make bullets, and I was
my
fine
God,
with my
wait,
kids.
what?
Yeah, he would measure it out, and he showed them how he'd weigh it, and he would.
God.
I had no issue with that, by the way.
Right.
Even though I would openly tell my kids, like, yeah, I don't like guns, don't love them.
Yeah.
And he'd say, you like throwing rocks? It's like throwing rocks.
It's true.
He's
I
like, do you
guess.
want to come throw rocks with me? I was like, sure. So
Yeah.
I went with him, and we went shooting in some range he took me to. So he said that he would have issues as well trying to speak with the NRA because he wasn't allowed to have nuanced conversations. And he is someone who is a gun owner, who enjoys guns, who believes that we should have the right to have guns, and yet still was not able to have any conversations that were nuanced because there is a slippery slope fear that as soon as you introduce any sort of legislation,
Right.
that all guns get taken away.
Right. That makes complete sense.
What do you got on there? What do you got there, Adel?
Do you think
Yeah.
that America is doing better or worse than other first world countries at addressing mental health, taking care of its population in regards to mental health?
I think we are doing better than some, worse than the countries that I look up to.
Because you see a lot of like stuff on the internet about like how other cultures are not having a lot of the, some of the, for example, the mass shootings, or like a lot of the stuff that we're experiencing, mass terror, things like that. Other countries are not experiencing that. I know it's sometimes a gun issue, but it's also a mental health issue. And it's just interesting that a lot of first world countries are not experiencing the same thing that we're experiencing. So in some ways, it feels like our country is failing us in that, in access to mental health, right?
Sure. Well, so there's a bigger healthcare issue that
Right.
has been a struggle to pass legislation to help people all have access to healthcare. And in a country this wealthy, should we be able to, I say wealthy because I don't mean the people, but I mean the country.
Yeah.
Should everyone have access to healthcare?
Yeah.
And that became really divisive again politically. Now, why are things like this divisive politically? I couldn't tell
It's
you.
kind of wild. It's like people having
Other
access
than-
to healthcare shouldn't be politicized.
Yeah, it's amazing the things that get politicized.
Yeah.
Because it affects everyone. None of us, all of us have to deal with what it's like to. My son went to the hospital for the most innocuous thing, the ER. We went to an urgent care. They said, we don't deal with kids. You have to go to the emergency room. We went to the emergency room, and now I have a bill of over $5,000 for what was essentially my son has constipation.
Oh, God. I mean, that's $5,000.
It's crazy.
That's crazy.
It's so crazy.
That's insane. Prune juice.
And
That could have saved you $5,000.
but people have such, serious issues that they avoid because they don't want to go to doctors. People tend to avoid things until there's a crisis. With mental health, people tend to avoid even taking care of their mental health until there's a crisis.
Yeah.
That's also a different issue, not just financial, which is
Right.
that therapy is only there for when someone is in extreme crisis.
Right. And or some people would say therapy is a privilege for the wealthy.
A privilege for the wealthy. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you agree with that?
I think there are many mental health clinics that have very affordable to free therapy if you want to take advantage of it. There are communities and people who are resistant to doing so.
Yeah.
And we need more of it without a doubt.
Okay. What has been some of very obvious, glaring fallout that you're seeing post-COVID, just with adults, with humans?
Okay, so
Because
I'm gonna. Whatever I say, this is not research based. I mean, one, we probably don't even have enough research to be
Right.
able to tell yet what's
Too
going on.
soon.
So I'm thinking, when you asked the question, I started to think of one, my nephews, and the other are the college-aged and high school and college-aged kids that I work with. And I say kids, they're over 18, but I'm an old man. They're kids. They're also emotionally still kids.
yeah.
Which is, they are in college, but they still have some stunting left over from COVID. They have some emotional stunting because they did not get to experience the world in the same way we did as teenagers because COVID shut them down.
Wow.
So they're still navigating sex and dating and friendships in ways that feel younger. And that's really interesting to me.
So interesting. Like, I'll tell you for myself, I never considered myself I was never paranoid. I was never worried about things. I'm loosey-goosey. I now find myself,
Oh, really?
You're like, don't I know?
How do you feel now?
Please put it back.
Yeah.
I find myself like when I'm invited to large events, I'm not even afraid of getting sick. I don't want to go to large events. I'm nervous about that. That never used to happen to me. There's things that I'm like, that's not even me. Where is that coming from? And there are people that are still very, very afraid of wearing masks when we know in many regards the fatality is lower. Like people, right? So like, there's clearly a lot of residual stuff around health. I guess the stunting. What's the antidote to that? What do we do?
Well, we're out of practice. I mean, the antidote to everything is practice.
Yeah.
I had a client today who was discussing his fear about empathy and his mental state. And all of this is a muscle, right? That he's not as sharp as he used to be. And you can work on those things. You don't use it, you slow it
or
down.
lose it.
We all do. go to work and you come home and it's your life and you do the same thing on repeat and you're not using the muscle. I am lucky that I enjoy being curious and learning new things, and I think that keeps me sharper. I want to stay sharp. I'm always teaching myself something. In the last few weeks, I started teaching myself piano. I enjoy like using my memory and playing with things to learn new things.
Yeah.
And that's helpful.
And with the young students that missed out, go do the things, go to the parties,
And with empathy, with social situations, you do have to practice being in those situations.
So I should have gone to the wedding last night.
That's right.
I actually was thinking that all night.
We all have to practice doing it. I also got very used to my entire practice was moved to my child's bedroom. That was my therapy practice for a year and a half.
Yeah.
I opened a new office I couldn't use.
Yeah, that's right. What about you? Anything that like kind of stuck with you since COVID that like should have gone away but didn't?
Well, first I'll tell you a thing I miss about COVID, weirdly, because my wife and I were discussing this. We had close friends. But during COVID, we became weirdly close with them in the sense that all of a sudden they became our pod because we podded up with them.
Yeah.
And they became this extended family. And COVID's over now, and they moved 25 minutes away, and we talk all the time, but not as much as we used to. We don't see each other anymore. And we were talking about how much we missed this weird familial feeling we all had together, helping each other with the kids, taking turns, going out. It became such a special, unique experience. And in some ways, we were more connected to each other in person than now when you get on phones, text, etc. So I miss that. That was really unique and interesting for me. It slowed the world down, and I actually, in some ways, felt connected. Yeah. I would bike with friends. Two friends and I, the three of us bought these electric bikes, and we would bike once a week during COVID all over the city. And the city was quiet, but it became this really special thing we did. Yeah. So that I miss about it, weirdly.
Not weird. It completely makes sense, right?
Yeah, I guess it tells me what's so important. I love connection with others. I love
meaningful
intimate,
connection,
meaningful experiences.
Yeah,
I meant weirdly, and it was also a tough time, and
so true.
So many deaths, and it was so hard, and my work was so difficult at the time as well. You're going through your own stuff, and people are dealing with real crisis, and so it was without a doubt very difficult too.
Sorry, continue.
No, you asked me a question I didn't answer. I was telling you the positives. Your question was,
are you feeling any residual for yourself that you didn't let go of?
My wife pointed out that I'm not as social as I used to be, that I'm in the habit of going to work and coming home, and where she used to say, spend more time at home sort of thing.
She's trying to tell you to get out of the house.
She's now telling me, get out of the house.
Get out of the house.
She's like, what's wrong with you? Like, get out, go see a friend.
Plus, I know her.
Fine.
So she is saying get out of the house.
Like, what are you doing? Watching TV or sitting in the corner reading a book or playing. She's like, get out of here, you dork.
I'm the same.
She's like, go hang out with your friends. I'm like, you're right. It's like harder for me to make the silly effort to drive over the hill. I mean,
it's so true. I'm having the same
drive over Laurel Canyon. Like, what's going on with me?
I think a lot of people have that.
So she was right. And I reached out to one friend in my neighborhood, like a father friend. I'm stuck with these single friends, as you know. Mm-hmm. So they're in very different, having very different experiences than me. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to go out till 4:00 in the morning listening to terrible EDM music in a nightclub. Like, I didn't like it in my 20s. I was this guy, like sleeping on the couch. Like, let me know when you guys are leaving. Like,
me either.
So I reached out to someone in my neighborhood and said, hey, I miss you. We used to hike all the time. I think it's important. I need connection. And he wrote me back like, thank you so much. I think this all the time. I would have never written you. Like, let's hang out. And we started to set up like a dinner that we do once a week.
Love that.
It's important. I had to push myself to do
noticeably absent was your text to me when you were starting to hang out with people. So that's cool.
You want to hang out, Adel?
Yeah. I have to fake, needing a resident therapist to get you to come over.
Is that how you got me here?
No, God forbid.
Just wanted to get lunch?
I do notice that I also don't hang out with people, and I do miss people. It's interesting you bring that up, and maybe a lot of people are going to figure that out right now too. Where does one begin when they're feeling totally depressed and lost? What's a small step somebody could take to pull themselves out?
Sure. I mean, depending sort of where you are in the depression, but I work with it a lot. You have to behave counterintuitively. So when you're depressed, you don't want to get out of bed. So the counterintuitive move is to get out of bed. Very small steps to do things to get yourself active and also engaging with people, which is hugely helpful.
Whoa.
So, again, depending where you are in the depression, but overall, it's getting out of bed, it's taking a small walk, whether it's 2 minutes or 20 minutes, and all of these things really does help to start to move the depression, to minimize it a bit. Eating well, exercise,
Yeah.
right? Like
The
these are
obvious stuff. But even just the counterintuitive, that's not even
right. I was going to say sleep, but with depression, you're sometimes sleeping too much. But healthy sleep, meaning then you have to wake yourself up. So eating well, exercise, and sleep, that is when you're depressed and you're sleeping too much maybe, is getting yourself out of bed at a certain time. So structuring your day is really important. Those 3 sort of basic things are really important just before therapy, before anything else. As you start to work on that, really helps give you a good base to be able to even do the work.
Yeah.
What happens when you start getting depressed and you stop functioning is it starts feeding on itself and everything gets worse and worse. You isolate, you start eating badly, you're not sleeping well, and everything starts feeding on itself. It gets more and more difficult.
Yeah. Are there like non-obvious signs? Like I realized, like I mentioned earlier, like I realized I was very depressed as a kid, but didn't know I was depressed. Are there some signs? Like some people don't know they're depressed.
That's right.
Right?
It's so interesting. And when I work with younger therapists, younger meaning newer therapists, or therapists in my practice, I'll always remind them not to ask a client if they're depressed.
Right.
But they don't know what depression is.
It's so true.
Ask them how they're sleeping. Ask them what's changed. Ask them about their hygiene, about certain aspects of their life.
Are you seeing friends? Are you calling people?
Yeah, you have to name the thing.
Right. Like with children, you have to get them talking, but we're no different. Just
they don't have the name for the for the feeling.
Right. They might not know. I mean, I've had to, in my life with friends, I've had to say, like, I think often, I'm not even talking sporadically. I have to be like, I think you are depressed and here's why. But very often I notice people close to me, they don't know.
Yes.
And I think just even like you, I'm exposed to a lot of people on a daily basis, me through my social media, you through an actual career. But like, I get to see things about society and people that I would say people that are not exposed to a lot of people don't see. I'm seeing that there's major depression and people are unaware of it.
Sure. You see it in probably the questions people write you or the way they're wording the questions.
Yeah. Or even the fact that they're asking the questions sometimes for me. How does one find a good therapist?
So ideally, you're in a world where therapy is more common, meaning, friends in therapy, and you can ask for recommendations. When you don't have that, you can always search for therapists in your area. Well, there's 2 things. One, we talked about therapy being cost prohibitive at times. So if you do have insurance, you can call your insurer and ask who they have that is in network.
Right.
I'm not in network, and the truth is a lot of therapists aren't.
Well, I know. Can we address that? A lot of the good therapists are not in networks.
Do you want me to answer your first question?
Yes.
So you can go on Psychology Today. You can look for therapists in your area. And every therapist I know will offer a free consultation.
Right.
I want it. I want to see who I'm meeting with and see if we're a good fit as well.
Right.
I often recommend people go somewhere else, or I'm too busy and I'll find someone who I think is a good fit for them and so on. But
in what way would someone not be a good fit for you?
Someone who, let's say, has a debilitating eating disorder issue that requires something a lot more than weekly therapy in a private practice, things like that.
Got it. Okay. And then how do you know if your therapist is good? Like, how do you know if you're in a good situation with your therapist and it's not just a waste of time?
So you see them a few times. I think it's really important to go a few times and see if it's a good fit. You should feel that there is a safe base in the room. We talked about kids needing to understand the rules of the world so they can feel safe within it. I think therapy needs to do the same thing, which is to create the kind of environment where you sit in the environment and you understand the rules of this world, what this looks like in the room with me. so you can feel safe to be able to explore things, so you can safe to know that when you don't want to explore things, you can stop and so on. So you can be safe to talk about how you feel in the room with the therapist, which is uncomfortable, or meaning maybe uncomfortable with the therapist, but to be able to say you're feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or you like the therapist, you don't like the therapist. Those things are really so important in therapy. And to see how those challenges, or in the beginning, how that rapport, you know when there's a good rapport with someone where you start to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
You have to also check your own biases in terms of, am I resistant? Am I so resistant to therapy that anyone I see, I
Right.
will, find fault with?
Right.
And therefore I try, this thing doesn't work. But outside of that, assuming you're doing the work, I think when there's a good rapport with someone and it feels right and you feel safe and able to explore stuff and start to learn about yourself.
Do you, like, this is just a personal question. It's not even on my list. I'm just curious about
I can't
this.
see you, Adel. I told you. You keep calling me. Yeah.
I just have like friends and know people my whole life that have just like been in therapy for so many years. Is the goal not to like get the work done and then get out of therapy, or like I know some people are in therapy for so many years. Is that not too many years?
Maybe. So, again, that's individualistic, and I can't speak to someone's
Right.
experience in therapy, what they're getting out of it. I have clients who maybe are doing very well, and I'll say, I feel like you've met your goals. One, do you want to sort of reestablish new ones?
Okay.
Are there more things you want to explore? There was a client who we did really good work together, some real early trauma stuff and tough stuff she had to deal with. And there was an aspect of therapy. She said to me, like, we talked about things feeling okay, and she said, I wonder if it would be time to stop. What are your thoughts? And I said, I think you're functioning wonderfully. You're doing really well. And I pointed out a particular area in her life saying, if you wanted to work on this thing, this is an area that I think we could shine a light on.
Oh.
And she said, I don't want to do that.
Oh.
I don't want to explore that right now. It would be too messy for her life.
Okay.
And so we did not explore her marriage we were discussing, and chose to end therapy. Well, it's totally fine. I mean,
Right.
at some point she'll come back when she's ready, or she'll not, but that's up to her. I have a client now who is doing very well. Actually, it's interesting. I'll tell you some of the clients that are long-term. Maybe that would be helpful for you to think
Yeah.
about it in a different sort
Yeah.
of way. So some people come to therapy because they're in crisis. They show up, they vent, they work through the crisis with someone, and they leave.
Okay.
And they're like, I'll see you next crisis. Like, okay, but that's not therapy.
Right.
And the way I do therapy is psychodynamic. It's very important for me to understand your history and who you are, and see how that plays out in your current life, and find those patterns and see what works and what doesn't, and help you better your life and meet your goals in the best way you can, without any judgment, with you choosing to make decisions in your life that are yours and not mine, that we make together. Some people feel that their life is going well and that therapy is a part of that. I have clients who are in therapy because they've decided that that is a piece of their life, like AA, like the gym,
Right.
that are so crucial to them staying healthy, that, and they have the ability to do it, that once a week in therapy is a necessity for them.
Right.
So when I've even brought up this idea that I think you're doing great, I'll make room for another client. Like, it's really important for me to stay in therapy.
Wow.
And so I'll do it.
Right.
And then there are clients, on the other hand, who are doing well, who are just scared to leave because they become dependent on therapy.
That's sort of what
And that's different, right? That's so. It's a therapist's job to say, I think you become dependent on therapy. I think,
Right.
and let's talk about that.
Right.
And sometimes that opens up a whole other, host of issues, which
Of course.
is
Then they're back in therapy.
Yeah. But often it's the challenge, which is, let's see what it's like without therapy and how you do when you're not in therapy.
That's so interesting. I guess, of course, I've thought about it like in that it's like going to the gym. It's like any of your other self-care, I guess, but it would be the same thing with the gym. It's like if you can't step away from the gym, you physically can't. You'd have to look at that.
The rigidity
Around it.
Or right, needing it so much or using it in ways that are unhealthy.
Right.
But Yeah, well, I don't know why mental health is viewed as something that's only there for crises.
It's so true. That's actually how I was utilizing therapy. Was like I would just call my therapist when I was like when I had a very specific issue. I shouldn't say I use. That's how I still do it.
Yeah.
Um,
And not everyone wants to do
right.
certain. Listen, you don't need to pick at every scab. You
Yeah.
don't necessarily have to.
Right.
That's up to you,
Right.
especially if you've done this for years and you
Yeah.
feel that your life is going well and that you're comfortable with who you are and but is there a harm to it? I would argue that it was almost entirely always a benefit.
Yeah. I want to talk about something that's really near and dear to my heart. It's personal for me. It's ADHD. Why it's personal for me is because it's getting brought up a lot as it pertains to my daughter in school. Also here out in the world, people, I'm ADHD, I'm ADHD, I'm ADHD. I'm probably ADHD. I don't know. I've never been diagnosed. Do you think you're ADHD?
Yes.
Right. Okay. I don't know if this is too personal. Are you medicating yourself for ADHD?
No.
I'm not either. Okay.
I've tried it.
Yeah.
I've used.
Me too.
I've used, but not until the last. When did I start? I don't know, but not last 5 years or so did I attempt to occasionally use 5 milligrams of Adderall.
Yeah.
When I felt it was necessary. My one, I was not diagnosed with ADHD when I was young. It was also probably done less so.
Yeah.
The other is I learned a lot of tools and how to work around it. And then third, I think with age, it's just slowed down a bit.
Yeah.
I sit for hours with clients back to back.
Yeah.
One, anyone with ADHD who enjoys what they do can do it. When I used to write scripts, I could sit for hours too, even if it was difficult to jump into it.
Yeah.
But the more structured I made my life, I started to teach myself to be able to do those things, and I was able to do it.
Right.
So I love what I do, and I'm fidgety here. Here are my toes.
Me too.
moving
We're
around
both
too,
fidgeting.
right? Like little things like this
Yeah.
are fine. And sometimes when I'm on Zoom, I'll play with cards or magnets or
Yes.
and I tell clients like this is great for ADHD. It's so helpful for whatever reason. So
do you think we have an overprescribing problem? Well, there's a shortage right now.
There's a shortage.
Yeah. Do you think there's an overprescribing problem for ADHD medication?
Again, I can't speak to the shortage issue because I don't know enough about it.
Right.
It's probably a factory issue more than too much Adderall. But yeah, I mean, anyone could go into most doctors' offices and get prescribed anything they'd like.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to happen. You could really give out the criteria for blank ADHD, for example, and
I guess
have something prescribed to you.
the thing with the young, it seems to be getting younger and younger and younger, right? Which makes sense because a lot of kids struggle with impulsivity, sitting still, focusing.
Right. That's
Many
not always ADHD, right? Things are age appropriate. Things are
Right.
Things are also kids may be that way at a certain age, and as they get older, it starts to lessen. It's also environmental. I mean, sitting in a classroom that way is difficult for a lot of kids. Is it ADHD? For some.
Yeah.
It's also a difficult way to learn. It wasn't the way I learned best.
Yeah. No, same. I just, I worry sometimes that we're labeling young brains so young before they've had a chance to develop. Where it could just be a young brain that has, like you're talking about with Asher, just like it's sometimes just things are developing at different stages.
That's right. And hopefully you've good psychiatrists and child psychiatrists you trust. And generally with ADHD, if you give a child medication for it, you don't see more problems. You see it working really well.
Yeah.
Which is also an answer of whether it works well or not, which is the speed given to someone with ADHD helps them hyperfocus in some areas.
Right.
And do really well in certain environments. And for other people, it would make them feel shaky and they're having a heart attack and jumping out of their skin.
That was me. I felt like I was having a heart attack and jumping out of my skin, although it's interesting because I really feel like I have ADHD.
You might. There's also non-stimulant medications for ADHD, like Strattera. I'm not a
I know.
psychiatrist.
Do you prescribe? No, you
do
don't.
not prescribe medication. I'm
I
not
wish
an
you
expert
did.
in medication.
You'd be a much more fun friend to have.
Sure.
Okay, like last couple questions.
Okay.
we're seeing this thing a lot where women are taking on a lot more feminine and masculine roles, whereas it's pretty clear that like men are, for the most part, keeping their more traditional, like women seemingly are adopting a lot of masculine, feminine roles out in the world, in their careers, in their homes, etc. Men are, in many ways, maintaining their traditional roles. But across the board, I'm hearing from many women, many friends, many singles, there's been this change in men not pursuing women in the same way. I would say less hunting, less of a hunter kind of approach.
Yeah.
Are you experiencing that? Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
I'll tell you what we were speaking about kids in college, and one of the more interesting things that I've seen is that all of society's rightful talk about where masculinity has been toxic, let's say,
right,
where men have behaved terribly and have used women sexually and not engaged in relationships and can't be committal and all this sort of terrible behavior. Interestingly, I'm seeing a lot of young men in college who feel like women can't commit and they're struggling with getting into relationships, and all they want to do is have casual sex.
There's the feminine taking on more of the masculine roles. I think it's really, like, there's a lot of content out there about this. A lot of the male podcasters that I listen to are talking about this, where just men are not hunting, and they're predicting that it's going to like deeply impact society in the way that like people partnering up, finding relationships, getting into relationships, maintaining relationships.
All right, so okay, all right.
And don't be biased because you're a man, okay? No. I want you to really, like, you know what I mean? Because I have to also be aware that you're a man. Most of my guests are women, so it's like easy for me to do all this man talk.
You can man talk with me. So I assume the podcasters you listen to have the point of view, or the male podcasters, that as the world has gotten more soft, men have gotten more soft, and it runs counter to our biological predisposition to be hunter-gatherers. And therefore, in softening society, we are sort of harming.
Yes, and that it's a pendulum swing from the Me Too, like, meaning we've gone. Right. Men are in men's defense. They are trying to, kind of overcorrect what they've been blamed of, right? Like blamed for.
So you're not wrong. Is this going to make you crazy?
There's a fly for the listeners, and we're going to ignore it. Okay, continue.
If it lands right here.
You're going to have a Mike. You're going to have a Mike Pence situation on this podcast.
That's great. This will be my big moment. I'll be mocked. So, yes, boys don't know how to manage. I'll tell you what I'm being hesitant about.
Okay.
Women are right. There is a problem in the way men have been treating women for a very long time. That is hugely problematic.
Right.
There are sexual assaults and rapes that happen all the time that are not reported, and that is hugely problematic, and it should be addressed.
Right.
Now, is there a pendulum swing? There always is when we start to address something. And I guess that pendulum swing is, if you don't teach kids, boys, how to engage in healthy relationships, then it all becomes fear-based and they get too scared to do anything.
Right.
And so, yes, that's the pendulum swing. I think it's what you wanted to touch on before we sat down when you said, I want to talk about woke culture, which is the pendulum swing is, because we want society to be more inclusive of other people's experiences, because that is really important, we end up being afraid to challenge anything, discuss, to learn, or to be curious, and those conversations get shut down.
That's exactly what I wanted to say.
Okay.
But I don't have the language you have. That's why you're here. Yeah, I worry, honestly, because my friends are experiencing that men are not approaching them. Men are not asking them out. Men are not doing the thing that society needs men to do. and it's making women kind of afraid. And it's all like meaning afraid of like what happens. Are we now to be on top of all of the things that society has asked us to do, to become homemakers and mothers and also have careers and also excel in those careers and climb the ranks and do all the things of the male and female? Now on top of that, we have to ask the men out. If AI could just help us figure out how to...
But what if we were in a world that was more egalitarian, where anyone asks out a person who they're interested in asking out? That ultimately the goal is to have a society that feels more egalitarian, right? It doesn't mean that...
That's a good question. That's a very good question. I guess I never thought about it that way.
Because what you're saying is interesting, which is that we want some equality, but we still want some gender roles firmly fixed.
I think a lot of people do. And well, I would say especially women do.
But if we want equality,
we don't want to
gender roles aren't going to be as firmly fixed.
Right.
But that's the world is going to change. Women are thankfully going to be as equally represented in powerful positions as men. And by the way, as terrible as men are, I'm joking, people in power can be terrible.
Yeah.
We will see women behave just as terribly because we're human beings capable of being really crappy.
Yeah. I am seeing what you're saying with your nephews. I am seeing a large wave of women also finding it behaving in a very similar vein, that it's maybe just it's across the youth, not necessarily gender anymore. We're like, people just are not wanting to commit to relationships. They're much more just casual about the whole approach. Does that affect society?
Can't we teach our kids how to behave in healthy ways?
Right.
I have a daughter and a son, which I'm thankful I get to have.
Yeah.
A daughter and a son. And it's been interesting, one, because I grew up in a family of 3 boys and then a youngest sister. So now I have a children where my daughter's the older one. One interesting thing, you realize, older sisters behave just like alpha males in these relationships.
It's so true.
It's the same thing. It's not, I thought it was more gendered and I was wrong. My sister yelling about gender stuff, and she was right to be annoyed. I was younger too, so I was treated similarly. I'm watching my sister do the same thing. Grab my son by the hair and drag him across the room, and he's just as fearful of her. And she's like, "Get out!" Right? Like I'm like, "Oh my God, it's amazing."
Oh, the oldest in my family was a girl, and we were terrified of her.
So not as gendered. I wanted my daughter to have male friends. It was really important for me. My son to have female friends as well. But my daughter, I remember telling her how important it is, and she used to ask me, I think, about having female friends. I always had. My friends are, I'm even friends with you, Adel. But that it's so important in the way you look at the world and interact. Just like having a broad group of people changes the way you look at the world.
Yep.
Right? Race, religion, creed, more exposure changes the way you think. And because of it, I watch her with her group of friends, and it feels more egalitarian in the way they behave.
Okay.
They're starting to be interested in sex, being sexual. They don't yet know what, they know what sex is, but they're not doing it yet, as far as I know.
Please God.
My daughter's very, we discuss everything very openly, which is wonderful. And I watch how they behave, and it just feels, I have to say, even though there's a complaint about the world changing, etc., I see them and I think things are getting better. Whether that's true or not, I can't answer you, but I can answer that in my own home. It feels that way. And it's generally how I deal with any of the overwhelming issues in our world when anyone tells me they feel so overwhelmed by it. And I say, you're right. There's a lot of negative to look at. But I try to create a world with people I love, who love me back, who are open and curious and caring. And my world starts to look that way.
I love that answer. I think that's actually a perfect place to end, because that's really positive and hopeful.
Okay.
Thank you for doing this today, Seth.
Thanks
I appreciate you. I appreciate your wisdom, your experience. I always love having you, and I think you're probably an amazing therapist. I won't know because you won't see me, but it's my hunch that you are. Thank you.
Thanks.